Hello, welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together to go over the week's events as covered by Tony on his Substack in the world of Scientology. Welcome, Tony, back to our show.
Good to see you, Chris.
Yeah, good to see you too. We have a few things to go over from the reporting last week. First off, and a lot of legal stuff this week that I wanted to talk about, starting with in the Jane Doe 1 lawsuit, there was a disputation about whether to slow this thing down or stop it, and the arbitration clause coming in again. What was this all about?
Well, so Jane Doe 1, her lawsuit was unsealed, I think, in June, and we call her Jane Doe 1 because she's one of the three Danny Masterson victims. But she filed a lawsuit last December that was only unsealed in June, revealing that before that Masterson incident in 2003, way back in 96 or no, 91, she was a minor, and she was recruited to the Sea Org by this guy, Gavin Potter, and she claims that he sexually assaulted her. And then the Scientology basically gave them a choice: you either go into the Sea Org prison or marry the guy. And so she's basically suing Scientology over a forced marriage when she was a minor, and really serious allegations of abuse. So that was kind of a surprise because, we were all thinking of her as a Danny Masterson victim. That's a separate story. So anyway, Scientology's done its classic thing. They dug into their archives and found a 2002 contract that Jane Doe 1 signed while she was at the Flag Land Base. And it's got an arbitration clause. And so they're saying, look, you agreed when you signed this document that you would never sue us. And if you got any problems, you're supposed to take it to our internal arbitration. So she fired back this week with a really interesting, it was submitted by her attorney, but clearly he was working from stuff that she had told him. Really interesting story about why she believes that contract is invalid. And so it goes into this long narrative about how she had gone to Flag because she was just going there to hang out with her friend Lisa Marie Presley. And her dad wanted her there because her mom was there and wanted some moral support. So she wasn't getting services, but she goes into this. What I really found valuable about this is shows you the catch-22s Scientologists always find themselves in. Well, if you're going to stay here, you have to sign a contract, even if you're not getting. It's just crazy. And so for that reason, she said that, the whole purpose of this thing was dishonest. She didn't know there was an arbitration clause that should be considered invalid. And also, her signature's on it, but nobody from Scientology signed it. So that's her argument about why this should be considered invalid. Now, I will point out, I was going through some of Valerie Haney's documents this week, and I realized her lawsuit was forced into arbitration, and her contract was not signed by Scientology. So, if part of the issue is these judges just totally don't want to get into the specifics about these, contracts. So I feel for Jane Doe 1 that she's got this big, long story. And I just figured, you know what, I'm just going to cut that out and show readers. I figure they want to hear the whole thing rather than my summary of it. So that was I think people found that interesting. And we just don't know. We don't know how these judges are going to react to it. Scientology has asked for that lawsuit basically to be put on hold until next May in order to figure out this issue. And Jane Doe 1's like, that's ridiculous. Come on. So we'll see what the judge, I'm going to be really interesting to see what the judge thinks in that case.
Yeah, very interesting, because it might help set the tone for what we can expect moving forward. And again, just to comment, because it drives us crazy every time we hear about it, this contract law being used as a roadblock for these victims to get the justice they deserve from Scientology is it's so stupid. To be blunt.
Well, it's just so inherently unfair. They set it up this way, and you can't sue us. You've got to submit yourself to a panel of Scientologists in good standing. Of course, if you're suing the church, you're automatically an SP. So what kind of justice could you get in a panel of Scientologists in good standing? Right. And then, now I think a lot about something that Cindy Plahuta and I were talking about the other day, and that is, at one point, Cindy Plahuta was not suing the Church of Scientology, but she read about that, I think, in the Garcia case. I think it was the Garcia case. And so she wrote a letter to the International Justice Chief and said, look, I've left Scientology, but I have a grievance. Like, you still have some of my money. I want an arbitration. She followed the rules exactly and never heard anything back.
Right.
So what does that tell you? What that tells you is Scientology is only using this to kill lawsuits. It doesn't really, believe in this whole arbitration system, on its own.
No.
So it's just a court strategy. And unfortunately, these judges, the problem is there is a strong urge in the court system to lessen their docket by pushing as much as possible to arbitration, combined with it's always we're a church, you can't look at our processes, you can't look at, because a lot of people will tell me, well, in California you have to have an attorney with you in arbitration. I said, not when it's a church. They get to set all the rules. I mean, I've even had attorneys telling me this stuff, and they just don't get it, that when it's a church saying this stuff, the court's hands are tied. So it's just a really bad situation for ex-Scientologists suing, not for others, but for ex-Scientologists, it's still a real issue.
Yeah, exactly. I've tried to explain this, and I'm glad you just broke it down like that, because every time I've tried, I get this weird kickback, right? Because it's funny, because religious arbitration is often a service for people, and it's something that relieves them from having to go to the courts and that kind of thing. It can actually be used constructively by constructive organizations. And unfortunately, and I've literally looked up the case law on this, the assumption, the assumption made by any court is that those contracts are valid and this organization is on the up and up, and you have to prove to them it's not in order for them to consider not going with the contracts. So it ends up being this area of law that has this really steep burden to it's a hurdle to get over, and who knew? Right. And Scientology dug this thing up, and they've been making mileage with it ever since, because people don't understand.
And you bring up a good point, and that is that there are other religious organizations that want to use this to try to help people so they don't have to go to court.
Exactly.
And those religious organizations are sensitive to people not thinking our religious arbitration is legitimate. So what you end up with, Chris, are people representing other religious organizations sticking up for Scientology's internal arbitration because they think it's helping them with their own situation. That's right. The situation I ran into at Emory University, where I was actually invited to speak at a online forum where people sort of describing and defending Jewish religious arbitration and Islamic and some others wanted to talk about that. And of course, they're sensitive to the fact that, look, this is a legitimate thing. And so they invited me on because they're all kind of like wondering about Scientology's version. And so I just quoted from the court record. I just said, look, this is what the appeals court said, that Scientology thinks this should govern you for the rest of your life. And other people are like, no, when you leave the church, you should leave it behind. And I said nothing that wasn't in the court record and wasn't a reflection of how the court was. Scientology complained, and Emory University pulled my segment from the video.
Wow. Just par for the course for these guys, Absolutely amazing. There are two things I noted today about groups like Scientology, and it's really hard for people to get their wits around this. One, they are incapable of taking responsibility for anything that they do. And two, they are sensitive to a degree that is like paranoia about anybody saying anything about them, and they will raise a stink in the smallest places. Dodge Landsman's story, remember that one? From months ago. It doesn't matter that if they can quash it, they will. It's all about control.
Yeah.
Now, moving on in the legal arena, because there were more stories on coming out this week, and one of them was confirmation on the anti-SLAPP motion or strategy in Leah's lawsuit. What is this, and what is this about?
Well, okay, so Leah filed her lawsuit in August. She's suing Church of Scientology for a pattern of fair game harassment that has caused her business, and she cites a lot of horrible things they say about her every day online as a way of driving away advertisers and making things hard for her. And you and I were talking about what do we think Scientology is going to come back with, and I had noted that in the complaint, Leah had kind of put out a little shot across their bow saying, "Don't try the arbitration thing because this is all about how you've harmed me since I left." Right? That's the key to the appellate ruling. And I remember I told you, I said, she's absolutely right, but I still would not be too shocked if Scientology still tried the arbitration thing just to slow things down and hassle things. But I said that most likely I believed it would be the First Amendment thing. They would basically just come back and say, "Hey, yeah, we called her names, but guess what? That's our protected free speech." So that's what they're going to do. The way we found out was that Scientology wants to, she's sued like CSI and RTC and David Miscavige. They want to combine into one response. And so they want to be able to submit more pages. They want to be able to submit 30 instead of 20 or something. And Leah's side said no. So the church had to ask, they had to file a document saying, "Judge, please, we tried to work it out with them. Please allow us to have 30 pages because we're going to do X, Y, and Z." And so that's how we got the little sneak peek of what they're going to do. They haven't done it yet. This week, we're going to expect to see this. They said they're going to do an anti-slap. And real quick, what that means is anti-slap legislation is really cool. In the old days, basically, if you were protesting, say, Monsanto, they didn't like it, they just filed a lawsuit against you. It didn't matter if the lawsuit had any merit. They would file a lawsuit to shut you up. And that got a nickname, probably from the legal academics, of SLAP, strategic lawsuit against public participation. In other words, you file a lawsuit, whether it's bogus or not, just to shut somebody up. And if big companies that have a lot of money can afford to do that to little guys that then are silenced. So anti-SLAP laws were enacted around the country that allow you early in a lawsuit to go to the judge before all the depositions and before all the motions, and just go to the judge, say, "Judge, this is a bogus lawsuit that's just intended by a big bully to silence the little guy who's trying to say something." Okay?
Right.
Excellent law. It's so valuable. We used it at the Village Voice when a billionaire was trying to silence us. It worked beautifully. So it's early, again, it's early in the lawsuit to try to kick the lawsuit out by labeling it bogus and having the judge decide that right away before a jury or a trial or anything. But of course, the irony of Scientology using anti-SLAP as if they're the little guy, and Leah Remini's the big bad bully filing a bogus lawsuit. I mean, it's just absolutely outrageous. I really believe that when anti-SLAP legislation was developed in the late 70s, the Church of Scientology was one of those big bullies they had in mind.
Right.
And so the fact that Scientology would turn around and use this tool against individual former Scientologists, it's just outrageous. But I'll tell you one of the reasons they like it. If you remember 10 years ago when Monique Rathbun sued Scientology, they filed an anti-SLAP against her. She overcame it, but it took more than a year. So I don't know if that's the kind of delay we're looking at in Leah's lawsuit, but Scientology clearly wants to slow things down or get it kicked out by saying they're going to file an anti-SLAP, and they already said it's going to be based on First Amendment. They're going to say, "Yeah, we called her names, and we can call her names all day long because that's the First Amendment." So again, and then I've told you that one of the reasons I think her lawsuit is so well put together is they focus not so much on the name calling. They cite it as part of the campaign, but it's that they've targeted advertisers, targeted family, and done what they could in coordinated campaigns to make it hard for her to make a living. And so that takes it to a different level. And I also like that she's got so much specific evidence about that. So I have a feeling a judge is going to look at that and say, "You know what? I don't think this is frivolous. I think, she's got a point. She's got to prove it. She's still got to prove it with evidence in a trial. But it's not something that's just intended to shut up Scientology, please."
Exactly. And I have to take a moment here because you just explained it so well, and everything's, I'm like, yeah, exactly. I think I explained it a little backwards on my Q&A yesterday. So if anybody was listening to that, please let's take the correction right now, right? Because the point was it's a kind of it's a point to to not let the bullying happen. And I had that right. I think I just had the direction of it wrong. But regardless of that, the other thing I wanted to comment on or mention about Scientology's letters to the judge or motions on this is they're not only saying, well, it's First Amendment, we can call her as whatever we want. They're actually even going, oh, no, no, no. She called us all these names first, see? We're just defending ourselves, see? She's the one, yeah. Right? So it's actually even a little worse what these guys get up to. So, yeah. All right. And then also on the legal front, and the last legal story for the week here is this long-term strategy revealed in the forced marriage lawsuit.
Yeah, we talked earlier about in Jane Doe 1 that she's opposing this arbitration thing. But what was interesting to me was this week, both sides were submitting status reports to the court. And so Scientology gave us a little preview of what's coming, which doesn't always happen. I thought that was kind of fun. Scientology's two defendants, Church of Scientology International and RTC, and Gavin Potter all submitted the same document, basically. And it said, look, this case should be kicked out because it's an arbitration issue. That's going to end it. But if it doesn't, here's what else we got coming at this lawsuit. And they listed a demur, a motion to strike, and a motion for summary judgment. So a demur we saw in Danny Masterson's lawsuit in the criminal case, even, which I was told was rare. A demur, I'm not a lawyer, but my experience with it is it basically asks the court, so what? Okay, so they're saying we did this, we did that. Where's the legal remedy? Where's the harm? And so it's trying to disrupt a case and end a case early by saying that there's no real meat here. There's no real thing to fight over here. We're not going to argue the facts. Even if the facts are true, it just doesn't rise to the level of something that should be in court. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're saying they'll do after the anti-SLAPP. After that, they're talking about a motion to strike. They're doing a motion to strike in the Bixler case, where they're trying to gut the lawsuit by pulling out a lot of language about fair game and that kind of thing. And then the third one is pretty serious. That's a motion for summary judgment. And I know it's very common. I heard from an attorney who said, Tony, all these things are common. I know they are. But Laura DiCrescenzo, okay, her lawsuit, it was initially dismissed for timing issues. It was restored by an appeals court that said, no, she did file it in time. And then they filed this motion for summary judgment. What that is the defendants just come and say, look, this should not go to trial. There's not enough evidence. It's not a legitimate, another way of saying it's not a legitimate case. And I got to go to the courtroom. This was, this was early. This was 2013 or something like that, about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And at that point, at LA Superior Court and Civil Court, I got hooked into the Wi-Fi on my laptop and nobody said anything to me. And I blogged it live as it was happening. I didn't have, like with the Danny Masterson trial, everyone had to wait. And then I'd run out to the hall and I'd send them a ton of stuff. For that Laura DiCrescenzo case, I mean, I was typing live right there. It was wild. It was so fun. And she won that. And then they got to do it again. I've never understood why Laura D had to go through 2 summary judgment hearings, but she survived them both. And only then did Dave end that suit and cut a check. Mm-hmm. So, again, none of these 3 are that unusual: demur, motion to strike, or motion for summary judgment. But I just think it's interesting to see Scientology lining them all up, all these things, because they, cost is never an issue. That's another thing that happens in lawsuits, is sometimes it's like, well, we could file a demur, but that's another $58,000. I don't know if I want to do that, whereas Scientology is just like, line them up, let's do them all. I mean, the only thing that they're missing there is they like to try to disqualify the attorneys. And what's the other one jurisdiction. They like to go after jurisdiction. All their tricks, man. But so they are lining them all up for Jane Doe 1. But she's got a great legal team. I really think she's got really top-notch lawyers.
Good. Well, that's what's required on this because as we've mentioned before, it's not the law's not this like, monolithic, everybody gets it, everybody understands, everybody's on the same page. It's the quality of your lawyering that's going to get you where you want to go because they're the ones who interpret it right, make the good arguments, make them in a clever and imaginative way for this context. And that's what we've needed for a really long time in these cases. So I hope we see that with this. And finally, or not finally, actually, second to finally, was this kind of up note, Piece of Blue Sky anniversary. John Atack, right?
Out of the blue, John Atack sent me this commemoration of his 40th anniversary. And I knew some of the things about his, leaving Scientology, but I didn't know half of that. That was crazy. I figured it meant more to you, though. I mean, that must have been wild reading some of those names and some of the things he went through, like Captain Bill and all that. It was kind of like he was half in, half out, and I don't know, bizarre story. But thank you, John Atack, for all the years of service you provided. The great book, Piece of Blue Sky, and thank you for this essay about how you got out of science. I love it when people celebrate their anniversaries. I know you do too, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, this year has been my 10th, so yeah, it's been a decade out and it's been a wild 10 years. And John's breakdown of this was awesome as usual. And I love that he linked to a video where Captain Bill is sitting there going on a roll. And if you haven't seen this guy, right? If you haven't seen video of Scientologists talking like Scientologists, this is the video you want to see because this is like fire and brimstone. I mean, these guys are really into what they're talking about. And
you should do a react video to it and narrate it as he's doing it. I bet people would love that because you would know it a lot better than me.
Oh God, that's a good idea. Maybe I should do that. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that's a good idea because it's only about a 20-minute video and it really gives you an encapsulation of the chaos and the fervor and the anger that these people were feeling in the United Kingdom, mind you, when things were falling apart in the early 80s and things were going crazy and Miscavige was in the middle of his takeover. I mean, this is what was happening. And Hubbard was still around and it was a wild time. And you get a little window into that as well as John describing his whole story. So it's a story worth looking at for sure. Okay, and finally, we have this news on Danny Masterson being word coming out. Maybe he's declared now. This is the word on the street. What's your thoughts and reactions on this?
And say what it is. I know I've seen a lot of headlines on posts saying Scientology has declared Danny. Well, let's be careful about this.
Yep.
Jeffrey Augustine has talked to some under the radar Scientologists who say they were brought in for briefings and told that Danny was declared. Friday night, Jeffrey went on Mike Render's channel and had a really great discussion. It was Mike, it was Mark and Claire Headley, and Jeffrey. And Mike pointed out it may not necessarily be the case, and that some of these people are being told that merely as a PR move. Who knows? I'm sure that I'm glad that Jeffrey has brought this out and that he's heard this from these people. It's definitely something we should all be paying attention to, see if we can get more evidence one way or the other. I don't know. But it's really interesting. And Mike actually was a viewer that suggested something that Mike thought was really great. He said, if it's a PR move, the timing is everything because David Miscavige probably does not want questions about Danny Masterson from the whales at next month's IAS Gala.
That's right. That's a very good point because I made the point today in my Q&A that nobody in Scientology at the IAS event is going to comment on or bring up to Miscavige the protesters. That was a question that was asked to me. I went, no. These guys aren't going to talk about that. But Masterson, that could be a sensitive topic.
I'm confused by it. It's like, wait a minute. Normally anybody that commits a crime like that's caught doing a crime like that, they're kicked out immediately. We haven't heard anything. We haven't seen anything. What's going on? Totally legitimate for them because they can probably see how much this whole case has hurt Scientology's reputation. So, and Mike went all into that. So did Mark and Claire. And I think excellent points they were making about this is about Miscavige. This is about Miscavige and how he wants to be perceived. And when I told Jeffrey that my first question about his story was, what does this mean for the money on the appeal? Because I think there's some pretty good evidence that Danny has at least gotten some of his legal money to pay for his defense in these trials from the Church of Scientology. And the reason I say that is we've seen some of his attorneys do some really strange things that would only make sense if they were taking direction from David Miscavige. And those attorneys would only be taking direction from David Miscavige if he was helping to foot the bill. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I have no hard evidence of that. But like I said, we saw things that suggested that Scientology may have been helping to pay the bill. Well, if they declare him, does that shut him off right when he's about to start maybe a 2-year appeals process that's going to cost a boatload of cash? I don't know. I wish someone in the Masterson camp would speak up, because people are making a lot of assumptions about Danny, about Bijou, about their relationship. I understand why people are speculating about all these things, but I don't know. Often the truth is a lot different. But it'd be nice if somebody in there would give us a call on Chris.
Oh, absolutely. I'm telling you, that's my first point. What's up with the family, right? Because you remember your podcast interview with the father, with the stepfather.
Oh, Reach.
Yeah. And he said, straight up, look, if they mishandle this, they're going to have 5 Leah Reminies on their hands or something, 9.
Right.
So there's that. So that family situation, and we've discussed in some detail, is not random conjecture. That's a very real world situation they got to deal with. And if declaring him, and we know how Scientologists are, and they will go with the church, but this family's real tight. So this was always a question for us. What was going to happen with that? Well, if he's being told, or if people are being told he's declared, their family's certainly going to hear about that. So what's going to happen there? They must have, set that up. Or are they grossly mishandling it? A point I made today is I will over-assume and give Miscavige the benefit of the doubt all the time that he's smarter than he is, right? It could be that this whole thing is just for the PR of the IAS event, and screw the family. We'll deal with that when we get to it, right? Who knows right now? There's so many unanswered questions, including whether this is actually a thing or not. The other thing I wanted to bring up is in answering a question that people might have that hasn't even particularly been brought up a lot. He and the Church of Scientology are co-defendants in this civil trial. They're going to have to coordinate their defense, right?
Yeah. See, that was one thing that they brought up Friday night, was they were questioning, how is Danny's attorney going to work out with the Scientology attorneys? But I don't think that's an issue, because Danny's attorney is Andrew Brettler. He's specialized in these cases. Remember, he was actually representing Prince Andrew. I mean, this guy,
whoa,
he's not going to be. He gets his hands dirty. Let's just say that. Andrew Brettler represents Danny Masterson. The people representing the church in the civil case are William Foreman and Matthew Hinks. Now, I don't think they're Scientologists. I may be wrong about that. They're just very loyal to Scientology because Scientology is paying them tons of money. So I don't see any issue between Andrew Brettler and William Foreman and Matthew Hinks, regardless of Danny's status in the church. I might be wrong about that. Maybe, if Dave really has thrown Danny to the curb, I guess he could end up telling Foreman and Hinks, listen, don't help out Brettler, don't help out Danny. I suppose, but I don't know. I think that we'll see how that came. Mark kept mentioning what's it going to be like for Danny if he's suppressive in the trial, and I would just be cautious. These cases rarely go to trial. Even if there is one, it's 3 or 4 years from now. We'll have a pretty good idea by then what Danny's status is. Right now, things are a little up in the air. But I'm grateful to Jeffrey that he got that information, and at least we've got something to work with, and really, really interesting.
Absolutely. And I'm just gonna add to what you said, because I brought that point up about the lawyering and the policy of disconnection with SPs, and I don't know that people are aware of the fact that there are exceptions made to that. I've seen them, especially when legal is involved, or legal consequences are involved. And here I'm referring to shared custody of a child with an SP. You gotta coordinate with them. And in a legal case like this, there would still, they could communicate through the lawyers. So I don't think it's an issue either. But I'd heard rumblings about it, and so I thought we should address
Also,
it.
there's this idea that apparently somebody was told that he's being declared because he's not going up the bridge, and I find that.
What?
Well, look, Scientology can declare you for anything. I mean, they could declare you because you put the wallpaper up the wrong direction. But a lot of these celebrities that were born in are very lazy about going up the bridge.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just not important to them. And I've never have you ever heard of a celebrity being declared because they weren't clear?
No, that would have. I don't understand the context of somebody even suggesting that. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I've never heard of anything like that.
I would think that if Danny really was being declared, it would not be over victimizing women. It would not be over covering up with the police.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be over, getting Scientology all this bad press.
Oh yeah,
because ultimately that's the biggest sin, right? Right, Chris?
Absolutely, it is, and causing a shore flap, to say the least, right? That's actually a crime in Scientology, is causing a shore flap. And no joke, his would be upgraded to suppressive act status, right? If they were looking for something like that, it's there. And you're right, they would not put in writing that he is being declared for what he did to these women. That's not at all what's going to be in there, because there is a written issue somewhere. If he's declared, if it's official, it's in writing somewhere. So maybe someday we'll get to see that. All right. And those were the stories for this week, guys. So you see Tony's address as I always wrap up here for his Substack. Go to it, subscribe to it, get your notifications every day. Tony, anything you want to say about coming week?
Well, let's just say I was on assignment this week and I'm writing up something big this weekend. So hopefully everybody's going to see it pretty soon.
Well, all right. Something to look forward to. All right. And folks out there, of course, like, subscribe, support the channel, support the show. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.